So is Kung Fu Panda 4 the worst movie in the franchise? Yes, but by no means does that make it a bad movie. I actually really enjoyed this movie. I just think the first three were just that good that it's going to be pretty tough to beat those three movies out. So let's talk about this thing. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Kung Fu Panda 4. So in this movie, Po has essentially mastered Kung Fu, and now it's time for him to choose a new Dragon Warrior. But while he's choosing a new Dragon Warrior, a new villain emerges in the Chameleon, who is played by Viola Davis, and now Po must team up with Awkwafina's character Shin to bring her down. As always, starting off with the good, and the first thing I have here is, of course, Jack Black. Now, as always, Jack Black was his usual self as Po in this movie. He was funny, he was charming, and really, Po is Jack Black and Jack Black is Po at this point because he is just a joy to watch as a kung fu fighting panda. He really is the thing that keeps these movies going and keeps them fresh and entertaining, and honestly, as long as Jack Black wants to keep doing Kung Fu Panda movies, I think they're all going to be super fun and enjoyable as long as he is involved in it. And to add on to that, his partner in crime in this movie, in Awkwafina, did a good job as well. I mean, they had pretty solid chemistry on screen, and it was really fun watching their characters kind of go on this buddy cop adventure throughout the movie. Next up for the good is the humor, and the Kung Fu Panda movies are known to have really good humor within them, and this movie is no different. This was genuinely a funny movie, and it had quite a few laugh out loud moments as well. The humor wasn't forced at all in this movie, and that's something I can really appreciate because when it comes to watching movies, one of my biggest pet peeves of all time is forced humor, because when you get forced humor, it's usually poorly timed and honestly just not very funny, and it kind of hinders your experience when you're watching a movie. But that's one of the things I love about this Kung Fu Panda franchise, is that all of these movies are genuinely funny, and that just makes these movies a lot of fun to watch. Next for the good, I have the action, and even though I do think this is the weakest Kung Fu Panda movie, I do think it probably has some of the best action we've seen in this franchise. This action definitely felt different from the other movies in the franchise, and it felt like they took a lot of inspiration from anime, and you definitely felt that in that first fight scene where Po was taking on that stingray, I think it was, and just the way that fight kind of happened and the choreography of that fight. And it just felt fresh, and I really appreciated that because they definitely took a new approach when it came to the action sequences, and I think it turned out well. And when it came to this approach that they took on the action in this movie, it really made for not only cool action scenes, but really cool visuals as well. I mean, at times when watching some of these fighting scenes in this film, it felt like I was just watching a straight up anime. I mean, at one point they had Po running like Naruto out there. So action was really cool overall, and I'm glad they kind of freshened it up a little bit from the other movies. And finally for the good, and I just have to mention this, but they had this subplot between Po's two dads that really worked in this movie. I was kind of skeptical when they introduced it, and I was like, this might not be the best, but I was totally wrong on that front. I mean, it was probably one of the more entertaining parts of the movie. Both of Po's dads were pretty much just trying to find Po throughout this entire movie, and the adventure they went on was a lot of fun to watch and really entertaining. I mean, seeing the both of them interact throughout this whole movie was really funny. There was plenty of humorous moments between the two, and honestly, if they came out with a mini-series just on the adventures of both of Po's dads and what they do together, I would probably watch that. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is that this movie was really predictable. I mean, it was so predictable that you could guess what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, and all the details in between. I mean, the minute Awkwafina's character started talking about how she knew a lot about the Chameleon, I was just like, well, she clearly works for the Chameleon. And then they even solidified that fact when they gave us her backstory and she explained how someone took her in, but then purposely didn't name who took her in. And that was another cue to be like, oh, it was probably the Chameleon. So when we finally got that big reveal where she turned on Po and we found out that she was working for the Chameleon and that the Chameleon was obviously the one who took her in, it just wasn't really surprising at all because they kind of inadvertently told us earlier in the movie. It just kind of felt like this movie spoiled itself before we got to the big grand finish. And I know this is a kids movie, so at the end of the day, it's obviously not that big of a deal. I just wish they would have tried just a little bit harder to make that big reveal of her turning on Po and, you know, working for the Chameleon a little bit more of a surprise. And finally, getting into the bad, and the first thing I have here is that this movie wasn't wasn't as deep as the other 3 Kung Fu Panda movies, and in my opinion, all of the first 3 movies had this deeper message that went along with Po's journey, and this movie just kind of didn't do that in my opinion. In the first one, he learns that he has all the power and skill to take on Tai Lung by himself. In the second one, he learns to come to peace with his past, and in the third one, he becomes his best self by accepting all parts of him. So when we got to this movie, we pretty much got a master Po, so there really wasn't that much to explore other than him accepting the change of not being the Dragon Warrior. And this was essentially a passing of the torch movie, so they tried to give Shin that tragic backstory, but they really didn't explore that and dive deep into that like they did with Po in the previous movies. So in my opinion, the emotional moments didn't hit as hard as they usually did, and this movie kind of felt very surface level for me compared to the other ones. The last thing I have for the bad, and honestly this is probably just a me thing, but there really wasn't any Furious 5 in this movie, and for me that just made it feel like there was something missing in this film. The Furious 5 were in this movie all of 10, maybe 15 seconds. They were mentioned right there in the beginning of the film, and then truly didn't show up in the physical until the credits rolled. And even though I enjoyed this movie, for me it just felt like something was missing throughout it, and that was the Furious 5. And I guess at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. I just feel like there's no Kung Fu Panda without the Furious 5, and I think they did a pretty solid job at kind of working around them this movie, but for me, as I said before, I still felt their absence. So overall, yes, I enjoyed this movie, even though I do think it is the weakest of the franchise, but the standard set by the other 3 movies is pretty tough to beat. It was funny and had honestly some of the best action out of all of the movies, and as long as Jack Black is playing Po, these films will always be fun and entertaining. Those are my thoughts on Kung Fu Panda 4. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.